pulling up the subfloor should be easy, right? Right? Welcome to the Hippie, Geeks, and our Skoolie Conversion Soul the Sun Chaser. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification icon to catch all our new content. Now that we have a floor plan figured out, well, for the most part anyways, it is time to get the old subfloor torn out. We had taken out some of the trim pieces when we put the bunks into the bus, but for the most part the flooring hasn't really been touched. We know that there are a couple of soft spots in the floor, and we can see where water has leaked in at some point. We are hopeful that the floor isn't too bad, but we won't really know until we start peeling this plywood up off the floor. The first thing to do is get all the various pieces of trim pulled up. The plywood is going to be stuck down well enough without the extra metal and screws holding it all together. It is a bit of a process, as things have been siliconed or glued down over the years, but eventually we were able to get all of it up. Once the trim was up, it was time to start on the flooring. We decided to start from the back of the bus to get the hardest part out of the way first. There are several wheelchair rails on the floor, and at this point it looked like they were attached directly to the metal floor with the plywood cut out around them. As we started pulling up the first chunk of floor, the rails were indeed cut all the way through the plywood, making it easy to get the first chunk of flooring up and out of the way, making us think that the back of the bus wasn't going to be that hard. Spoiler, we were wrong. As we started working on the rest of the flooring sections, it became very clear that not all of the rails were cut completely through the plywood, which was going to make things considerably more difficult. To pull up the flooring, I started out with a short pry bar, a couple of large screwdrivers, and a claw hammer. We only used those to get the flooring started though, and once we got a section of the flooring up far enough, we could slip a small floor jack under it and let it do all of the work. Seriously, if you are planning on pulling out the old subfloor, pick up a small floor jack like this one. It will save you an incredible amount of time. Even if you aren't dealing with a multitude of rails like we are, the plywood is still going to be nailed and screwed to the metal, and the jack can bring a lot more leverage to bear than you can with a pry bar. Once we figured out that some of the rails were holding the plywood down, I went under the bus with our impact wrench while Lindsay held the bolt on top with an Allen wrench. Not surprisingly, more of the Allen bolts rounded out than actually were able to be removed. We let that go as it wasn't working and just moved on to another section of floor that might be easier to get up. It was getting late, but we managed to pull up the back corner under what used to be the wheelchair lift. There was some discoloration and a little surface rust, but nothing too terrible, which was a really nice surprise. We had now exposed the flooring in front of both back doors, and there was nothing too terrible. The question is, what does it look like under the rest of the flooring? The next day started with some cleanup. I have mentioned it before, but I prefer to clean up as I go. It makes it easier to move around and keep working without tripping on the wreckage that has come before. I pulled out all of the large pieces and tossed them into our utility trailer for an eventual dump run. Once the cleanup was complete, it was time to get back to ripping out chunks of flooring. The jack is yet again the MVP of this process. It is simply getting enough of the floor up to get the jack underneath and letting the jack do all of the work. This would have probably been a lot easier if I had a larger pry bar, but you do the job with the tools you have at the time, especially if you are broke and the extent of your purchases are a few angle grinder discs later in the process. The rear sections are by far the worst of this process as they have all the wheelchair rails. Once those sections are out, it should speed up considerably. At this point though, I decided to cut slots into each of the Allen bolts to hopefully be able to use a screwdriver to hold them in place while I unbolted them from below. I didn't have to cut too far in as it just needed to fit the screwdriver, but it still took a bit of time as there are a lot of these little bolts. Like, a lot of them, because the bolts are smaller, that means that there are more of them. After I got all the slots cut into the bolts, I took a couple of minutes to clean out the bus again and tossed it all into the utility trailer. I decided to ignore the rails for now and just get back to pulling up flooring. You can see with these sections how much easier they came up. The only thing holding these sections down are a bunch of nails and a couple of screws, and the jack pops them up pretty quickly. Once the section is up though, you have to break the linoleum flooring apart to get it fully removed. That is the last nearly full-size plywood sheet. After this, you can see where they just started piecing things together. These next two sections are the full width of the bus, which makes them harder to remove as the seat rails on each side are holding them in place. I tried using the jack to just brute force them up, and when that didn't work, I just grabbed the jigsaw and cut it in half, then pulled those pieces out of the way. After that, we worked on pulling out the last pieces of linoleum, the remaining nails, and the last little chunks of flooring that remained on the main larger section of floor. We were approaching the end of another day, and we spent the last bit of it cleaning up again, getting the bus emptied from the debris of the day because the next day was the final push on the main section of floor, trying to get those buggered wheelchair rails finally removed from the back of the bus. Needless to say, using a screwdriver to hold the bolts while unbolting from below simply didn't work, and I had to move on to plan B. As I mentioned earlier, we were a bit broke at this point, so I tried to make do with what we had. I had run out of angle grinder cutting discs, so I went at the bolts with the Sawzall. It kind of worked. Yes, the bolts eventually got cut apart. However, doing it like this ruined the blade so fast that it would make your head spin. It took a lot of force to make it work. They ended up bent and overheated, and I finally did the math and knew that the amount of blades that I had were not going to be able to do the job. Obviously, I spent some of our precious money on more angle grinder discs and started cutting the rails in half. It worked amazing. I had eye protection on as I didn't want to lose an eye, ear protection so I wouldn't go deaf, but you might notice the lack of a breather mask. For goodness sake, if you are going to be doing any amount of work with an angle grinder, wear a breather mask. You do not want to be breathing this into your lungs. Take it from me, it was disgusting, and I now have a full-on, decent breather mask for next time. Now, to avoid cutting the metal subfloor, I was not cutting all of the way through the rail. Instead, I would cut it most of the way through, and then split the cut by hammering my large screwdriver into the rail, which then split the rail fully. I started out by finishing up all of the shorter rails and then moved on to the two long rails on either side of the bus. These ones ended up being a bit harder as there was still a strip of plywood between the rail and the wall that was screwed down, making it hard to remove the plywood first. So I just went for it, doing the best I could, and eventually worked through the rest of them, ending up with another amazing cleanup montage. There it is, how we removed the main section of the bus flooring. We ran out of weekend, and it made for a good stopping point. It actually worked out for the best, as when we started trying to remove the flooring in the driver's area, we ran into all kinds of problems. But that is a story for part 2. So, how did the floor removal work in your bus? Did you even bother to remove it? I have seen a few conversions that decided to keep it, but the vast majority seem to be pulling it out like we have. Did you have wheelchair rails to deal with like we did? I haven't heard a lot of folks talk about them, but they were an incredible pain in the rear, and I would really have preferred to not had to deal with them. Now that they are out though, the flooring looks pretty great so far. The worst rust spots actually ended up being under the floor heater, but even that was only surface rust that we should be able to grind out without having to patch. Let us know in the comments below. We would love to know what your experiences were. If this is your first time here visiting Soul the Sun Chaser, it would be wonderful to have you subscribe. This channel is all about our schoolie journey, the good, the bad, and everything in between. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and check out our Patreon page or merch store to support the channel directly. Until next time, keep seeking adventure, chasing the sun.